Hey there, friends. Welcome back to Unannounced TV. I want to talk to you guys about something. About a week ago, or maybe a week and a half ago now, I published a video talking about a farm co-op in Michigan being raided for raw milk. And I had done some videos before. I had shared some information to you guys that came from some internal documents on how they were planning on handling this bird flu pandemic in cattle, and it getting into things like dairy products or meat products. So from the very early stages, I think that you've heard this dialogue that, you know, when you have a pandemic, when you have these situations, the government's control increases, and it goes beyond what they normally would have control over, because it's got the scariness of a pandemic tied to it, or a potential pandemic. In this case, a lot of people, there's still not a bird flu pandemic in humans, but there's the concern that it could spread to humans. So with that, the government has taken more control over things like raw dairy. And this includes the private sale of raw dairy. So this farming co-op is a membership co-op. These girls are only supplying raw dairy products to members of the co-op. And when you're a member of a co-op, I view it as you're an investor in that co-op. Of course, I recognize that it all depends on the legal wording of the contracts of the co-op. So I can't get into specifics with each individual one. I could just look at it from an overall umbrella and say, you know, typically this is how it happens. Well, I received an email from somebody. It's a bit concerning. Okay, so this has to do with Hidden Creek Farm in Michigan. Now, Hidden Creek Farm is a farm that, you know, sells some produce and some other products, but they also have what we call a cow share program. And in a cow share, you are actually buying an investment in the animal. Therefore, you have certain rights to that animal. We have, in the past, used cow shares for dairy products ourselves. And, you know, depending on how that cow share is set up from an investor standpoint, we choose, you know, who to renew that with, or if we want to go somewhere else. I tend to like cow shares where I have a little more say in how the animal I'm investing in is raised. But again, all of these things could be manipulated based on contracts. I would urge you, if you do this type of stuff, to really look into those contracts. Make sure you're investing with a farmer that you enjoy. But Hidden Creek Farm, from what I can tell, sounds like a pretty good farm. And they have this cow share program where they have people who own the dairy cows with them. And as part of that ownership, they get a regular supply of dairy products from that cow. Now, it is raw. They own a cow. They're getting a raw product from that cow. But what they do with it is up to them. I mean, it's their prerogative, and it's same with us. When we own it and we get our dairy products from those cows, I mean, it's up to us what we do with them. Give them to the animals, give them to ourselves. So in this particular farm, they have a herd share. So you buy into the entire herd, not just the cow. On Friday the 24th, Memorial Day weekend, they had an unexpected visit from MDARD, the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. They were in the middle of chores and found it to be rather bizarre and rude. So what happened was, they saw them pulling up. They were hurrying to finish what they were doing to get out and greet these people. They pulled up in their vehicle. They sprayed it down with a chemical. Now, this is kind of odd that they would just sit there and spray down their chemical, and then they drove past them and drove up to the house, as if to ignore the farmers whose farm they were driving on after spraying a bunch of odd chemicals on their car. Nobody knows what these chemicals were. They didn't disclose to them what they were spraying on their car. And now, you know, they've got these chemicals all the way up their drive. There's no telling if they're going to wash out and get into their soil, or what was in them. Okay, and that's the farmer's first concern, and it should be every farmer's concern. Biosecurity is a very big risk on farms. When we travel to Canada to film and all those other places, we're constantly asked to inspect our boots, inspect our shoes. I've been to farms where, you know, I have to stick my feet in a certain powder before I go walking on the farm, but it's the farmer who's controlling that biosecurity. So to have a government official come onto your property spraying some sort of chemical on their car and driving onto your property with that chemical, obviously it's going to raise some eyebrows for that farmer. Like, what's going on here? You're breaching my right to biosecurity and my obligation to my herd share. Technically speaking, you know, with a herd share, this department has no right of oversight. In a normal situation, okay, in a normal year, they have no right to inspect, no right, they're not selling the milk to the public, which is what this department, it normally would inspect, normally would investigate. So at this point in time, the state of Michigan is really trespassing. They don't have a warrant to be there. It's trespassing. It's trespassing with chemicals on the car. These guys get out, they want to search their herd share. They tell them that they can't search their herd share because they have no jurisdiction over it. Eventually, they leave, they're friendly about it. They tell them, okay, well, have a nice day. Well, then the farm finds out that they went and tried to get a search warrant to search their farm. But again, like I said, they do not have jurisdiction over a herd share. That farmers gave them a copy of their herd share agreement. And this is where I say these agreements are really important because the agreements determine how that herd share is structured. And if it's structured properly, then you will protect your investors in that herd share, and your investors will be protected from stuff like this. But eventually, from what I understand from reading through this post, this is Hidden Creek Farm in Michigan, you know, their concern is my concern, and that is that they're going to find a way around these rules. They're going to find a way to expand their reach of authority and try and shut down these sources of raw milk. And there are people that depend on raw milk. There are a lot of people that depend on it. There are people that would prefer to stick to raw milk. For those of us who have adapted our digestive systems back to raw food. I say back to raw food because, you know, today, very few people are used to eating raw food. It becomes a much healthier, vibrant lifestyle for a lot of different reasons. And I'm not going to get into the health impacts of, you know, what each type of raw food could possibly supply to you, because I'm not a nutritionist and I don't want to be saying the wrong thing. I know for me it has been a good thing, but there are people out there who depend on these raw food products, and they're trying to shut them down. And I said, you know, in a much earlier video when it came to, and this was information that I had been sharing with another dairy producer who's also a vet, and that is that when you have these pandemic situations, they have certain protocols that they'll start to roll out, and they will enable the government to have more authority, more control over our food supply that goes beyond the reach of what they normally could control. What they're going to do to try and stop the spread of HPAI in cattle. How far will this go? What you're starting to see are protocols kind of being handed out to dairies that say, hey, look, you need to have a manager for biosecurity put into place. We need to stop people from coming to these farms and to protect from spread. Infected cows need to be milked differently than the other cows that you know of. And don't give anybody the raw milk. That includes feeding it to people, feeding it to pets, feeding it to, or even disposing of it improperly. So they don't want wild birds being able to get to the milk. They don't want wild mammals to get to the milk, because as we know, this particular highly unusual strain of HPAI has been infecting more and more mammals. Cows are just the new thing. So there seems to be a growing concern, though, around raw milk and the spread from cow to cow to cow to cow. And what I have heard from some people is that in order to quell the spread and get control of it, they may implement FMD protocols. That's the foot and mouth disease protocols. Foot and mouth disease is a very serious disease. If it ever came to the United States, what would end up happening is they would essentially lock down the trade of cattle. I have a couple concerns with this, though. Number one is if we go to full FMD protocols, that would completely disrupt the beef and dairy industry across the United States. We haven't seen something like this done in a very long time, and so the disruptions to the industry that could happen if they went to full protocol, if they went on a national scale on this, it could be detrimental to cattlemen across this country, in my opinion. The other issue that I see happening here is a ban on raw milk, because they're already concerned that this is spreading through raw milk. They don't want raw milk going to calves. They don't want raw milk going to humans, pets, whoever. And the discussion has already been had. We don't want people drinking raw milk. So if this ends up creating a scenario or an excuse for a raw milk ban, that would impact a lot of people across the United States. And you're starting to see that in Michigan with these raids of co-ops, raids of herd shares. They have no involvement there, none at all. These are private investors with their farms is what they are. But they're overreaching, they're stepping in there. And my fear is that as we continue to develop this fear of bird flu, and we think that somebody could possibly drink raw milk and get bird flu and then pass it on to somebody else, there is currently no evidence of contagion between people. But if that were to happen, the government would most definitely come in and shut down even the private usage of raw milk. They'd even tell you, you can't drink the raw milk from your own cow, because that's what a herd share is, and that's what depending on how the co-op is structured, that's how it is. They're your animals. You're an investor in those. And I think that what we're seeing in Michigan, you see this in a lot of states where they start these processes of overreach to get a reaction, and I've seen it a lot out of Michigan in particular, where they start to kind of step over bounds to see how far they can go, to see what the public reaction is going to be. And by testing it in those little amounts like that and in those isolated areas, they can better determine how to implement it on a larger scale. When you look at Maine, for example, with PFAS chemicals, I mean, Maine was the first state to come out and offer to buy back farmland at a fair price from their farmers for being contaminated with PFAS chemicals, okay? These chemicals have been around for a very long time. A lot of people have cooked their food in these chemicals for a very long time. Teflon pans, if you ever wondered where that coating goes when it comes off. Anyway, those parts per million are much higher than what is coming out of the ground. But they started buying back farmland. And the next thing you know, the United States Senate wants to put in a bill that's modeled after Maine into the Farm Bill that would basically allow the government to spend $500 million buying back U.S. farmland. I mean, some of you may think this is perfectly fine. I'm just giving you the information so that you can digest it and appropriately, think through, okay, do I want to see this happen or do I not? And then you can make your own decision when it comes time to vote. In my personal perspective, I think this is bad. I think that we are slowly, every time something happens, we are giving up our rights to where our food comes from, our rights to choose what we put into our own bodies. The day we give up agency over our own body to our government is the day that freedom ceases to exist anywhere. It is the one thing I feel like we should all have. I mean, there's a lot of freedoms I think we should have. But if there's one thing that we should fight for, it is the right to choose what we put into our own bodies. And the fact that these people are going after herd shares just tells you how far this is going at this point in time. They aren't going after anybody who's selling something to the public. They're going after the herd shares, the private ownership groups, and saying, no, you can't distribute that amongst your investors. No, you can't own a cow and drink its milk, because it's the same thing. The next thing you know, they're gonna be knocking on somebody's door that has a dairy cow out in their field and say, hey, we need to inspect your dairy cow. Are you milking it? Okay, we're putting a cease and desist order on your right to drink the milk from your cow. It's the same exact thing. So pay attention, guys. Eyes wide open to what's going on there in Michigan. Hopefully more people will start talking about it because this is a very, very big deal. This is an agency that has gone well beyond its scope of enforcement, well beyond its right. I mean, they are literally going onto people's properties, trespassing, searching them, gaining information from them. Like even when they handed over their Herdshare agreement, they're accessing information without a warrant, without a right. It is unconstitutional in the United States of America. What they are doing is flat out breaking the law, but they're getting away with it because of the possibility of a bird flu pandemic. A bird flu pandemic coming from a bird flu that, like I've said 100 times on this channel, is highly unusual in the first place. Anyway, guys, stay safe and I'll talk to you soon.